Hello, everybody. My name is Travis Legleiter. I'm a extension weed scientist at the University of Kentucky, and I appreciate everybody coming on today and watching a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit here today about ryegrass management in winter wheat. So as we go into this, what I want to do is I kind of want to step back a little bit before getting too far into the weeds and talk and think about the entire system of weed control, and specifically weed control in winter wheat. Now we can do this with any crop, but with winter wheat, there's some unique things about it and the way we grow that crop. And one of those things is the crop rotation. So I'll get into more a little bit why this is important a little bit later. But, in Kentucky, where I am at, we do a lot of this 2-year, 3-crop rotation, where we are looking at, corn in 1 year, and then in the second year doing wheat with double crop soybean behind it. So you get 3 crops within 2 years. And so this is pretty common in Kentucky, as well as many other mid-South states that grow a lot of wheat. But in other locations, we may be doing more of a 3-year 4-crop rotation, or getting 4 crops within those 3 years, and basically doing the same thing, but getting in a full season soybean. And again, I'll get into why that's important here a little bit, especially for the weeds that we're going to be talking about today. So when you think about weed control, again, you really have to think about what are our most problematic weeds, when do they emerge, what is their life cycle. We have to think about what resistance events do we have in those weeds, and as well as the tillage systems that we're in. And today we're going to be talking a lot about no-till, because that is what we do a lot of here in the state of Kentucky. But the tillage system, when it comes to weed control, can also play a big role in that as well. So when we think about some of the more problematic weeds within our wheat acres, you have mare's tail, you have chickweed, henbit, dead nettle, wild garlic. Those are kind of the common players. A lot of winter annual weeds, which makes sense for a winter annual crop. But for the most part, within our wheat acres, we're able to control a lot of those weeds. We have the tools to control those. The one that continues to be a pain for us, or continues to be problematic, would be that one at the bottom. So Italian ryegrass, also known as annual ryegrass. So you can call it either one. It's the same species. I will be referring to it generally as ryegrass here today. So what we're going to be looking at is, ryegrass in wheat, why it's such a problem, especially in the rotation we have in Kentucky, and then some of the things that we're looking at to control that weed. So the first thing I want to talk about is, what are we dealing with ryegrass in the state of Kentucky? And this will apply to a lot of other mid-South states as well. But what are we dealing with as far as resistance goes? So a couple of years ago, we did a survey throughout the state, and we were able to get populations, about a little over 20 populations. Most of them came from kind of the south central region, where we grow a lot of wheat there. You kind of see that clump of orange counties there at the bottom, but we also got some from south central Kentucky, as well as over in western Kentucky, as well as up along the Ohio River bottom. So we deal with ryegrass throughout the state, and able to get a pretty decent collection there. Did some screening in the greenhouse, and we did have a couple counties that had populations we suspected as possibly glyphosate resistant. When we looked closer at those populations, so here we're just showing you the dose response curve, and the way this works is on that vertical axis, that's a visual control. So 0% control means you didn't get any control. 100% means it was completely dead. And along your horizontal axis, going from 0 up to 10,000, that's the grams of glyphosate per hectare. So obviously, as you go up in that rate, you would expect more control. So if you look at that black line there, the SUS line, that would be our susceptible population, and it reacts the way we'd expect it to. The more glyphosate you put on, the greater control you get. And that's what we expect. So that Daviess County population follows the same trend. So we determined that was not a resistant population. But the other two populations, the one from Simpson as well as Pulaski, you can see those lines. They do eventually go up in control, but it's much slower, and we were able to confirm those as glyphosate resistant populations. So we do have glyphosate resistant ryegrass within the state in 2 different counties, and that's in addition to some other glyphosate resistant populations we've confirmed down there in Simpson County as well. But we feel that there's probably more glyphosate resistant ryegrass throughout the state. We just haven't found it at this point in time, but we are keeping a very close eye on glyphosate resistant ryegrass, and there's a big reason for that in the state of Kentucky. But you add on to that, we also screen for resistance to Axial XL and Axial Bold. So Axial XL has pinoxidin in it, whereas Axial Bold has pinoxidin and phenoxaprop. So phenoxaprop is just another group 1 herbicide. So both of those actives are within the same site of action, just different actives. And Axial Bold is the product that replaced Axial XL. But we are doing this during a transition time, so we kind of looked at both. But you can see there we had several counties again that popped as possible resistance events. Taking a closer look at that, I'm not going to show you all these dose responses because it's just a lot to look at. But basically, we did find that we had pinoxidin and phenoxaprop resistance in 2 counties. And again, those are 2 counties where we grow a lot of wheat in the state. We grow wheat all over the state, but really intensive wheat management in those areas. And so finding that is a little bit concerning because pinoxidin and phenoxaprop, again, the 2 active ingredients in Axial Bold, are the primary products we use for controlling ryegrass post-emergence in wheat. And the reason for that is those active ingredients are the most effective against ryegrass. So this is a study we did back in 2020. And what we did there is you can see there's multiple pre-emergence products that we put on, followed by either Axial, again, that's the pinoxidin, or without Axial, and then followed with different spring herbicide applications. So we're looking at this as a factorial. And when we broke it all down, if you look to the right of the screen there, when you break it all down, the thing that has the biggest impact on ryegrass density, so a lower density would be higher control, the thing that had the biggest impact wasn't necessarily what we put down pre or did in the spring. It was whether or not we used Axial. So what I'm trying to drive home here is Axial or pinoxidin is a product that we rely heavily on for control of ryegrass. And the reason we rely so heavily upon it is because it really is the most effective thing we have against ryegrass within wheat. So losing it is really quite a big deal because it's kind of like losing the biggest tool or most critical tool you have in your toolbox. So when we walk all the way back and think about all of this, and consider ryegrass control in winter wheat, especially in rotation, especially in that corn wheat double crop rotation, 3 crops within 2 years. If you think about that and think about the fact that we're dealing with a winter annual grass that's glyphosate, pinoxidin, phenoxaprop, and also ALS resistance. I didn't show you that, but before we were using pinoxidin and phenoxaprop, we were using a lot of ALS inhibitors to control that ryegrass. So we selected for a lot of ALS resistance in those populations as well. So we consider all of that, plus the fact that we have pretty much all no-till corn and all no-till wheat. It creates a rather large problem when you look at the whole picture. So again, just to kind of draw this out, if you look at your wheat acres, right? Or when we plant wheat usually in October, sometimes in September, sometimes a year like this year, even into November. It grows till June, and the application timings we're using for ryegrass control are either at burn down and that post-emergence application of that Axial product, right? And then after you harvest that wheat, we go into double crop soybeans, plant them in June, hopefully get them off maybe in October, usually in November. Let that field set fallow through the winter, start planting corn in April, hoping to get that corn off September, sometimes October. The main time we're controlling ryegrass within that crop is before we plant it at burn down, usually sometime in March or April. And if you think about where ryegrass is at, it emerges in September through March, it goes vegetative throughout March and into May, and then reproduces and matures by June. So pretty much the same timeline as what we're looking at in our wheat acres. When you think about that life cycle, within our double crop soybeans, within that crop, there really is not any ryegrass out there. Yeah, there might be a few mature plants out there, but they've got seed on them. That seed's going going into the seed bank. And maybe there's some ryegrass emerging late in the season that double crop soybean, but there's no herbicide applications we're making to that crop that have any influence on our ryegrass population. So we kind of just take that out of the equation, and you're looking at most of your ryegrass control program is focused on the wheat acres or the corn acres. And when you look at the fact that we have glyphosate resistance, that eliminates one product in our burn down acres, both for our wheat and our corn. And if you lose that, you're down to basically one product, and that's gramoxone at that point in time. But you add on top of that, that in our wheat acres, now we're up against it with panoxidin and phenoxaprop resistance. Again, that's the actives in axial bold. And that means you're losing your post-emergence options in wheat. So we're very, very quickly eliminating all of our options to control this weed within that 3-crop 2-year cycle. And it turns into a really vicious cycle, especially when you consider that we're limited on post-emergence options within our corn as well for controlling ryegrass early in the season, with the ALS resistance being widespread. It turns into a really vicious cycle where we can really build up a ryegrass population very quickly within the system. So just focusing in on wheat today. So I could talk about the entire system, but today we're going to focus in on wheat and think about, okay, we've got glyphosate resistance, we got panoxidin and phenoxaprop resistance. What are some other things that we can do to help ourselves out here? Because we're running out of options really quite quickly with this weed in this system. So when we think about weed control within winter wheat, you have burn down in our no-till acres, right? You have either fall or spring post-emergence applications. And we already talked about, we've kind of lost those applications with that resistance event to the axial products. And also, we also do some applications pre-harvest, but those are really targeting summer annuals to come up late in the wheat season. And we're really trying to just help ourselves with harvest at that point in time. And those applications really do nothing for the ryegrass. So if you've lost those post-emergence applications, you've kind of lost your burn down option. The one area where we can focus in on is using a residual herbicide to help ourselves out there. Okay. And that's what we're going to look at today is, are there some things we can use to help ourselves out as far as residual herbicides go? So within the state of Kentucky, we do have some products we can use. And so this is also on some federal labels, and we'll get into that a little bit as well. So you have Zidua, you have Anthem Flex, and you have Fierce EZ. So if you notice, all of these have pyroxasulfone within them. Okay. So Anthem Flex and Fierce EZ also have some group 14s added in. Those group 14s aren't doing a whole lot for the ryegrass. We're really relying on the pyroxasulfone for the ryegrass suppression with these products. Okay. And you'll notice here, all of these are either delayed pre, early post, or with Fierce EZ, you have 14 days pre-plant, or Anthem Flex, you have pre. Now, the big asterisk on that pre is that pre-application is based on a 24C supplemental label that's valid in Kentucky. Okay. So if you're looking at that as an option, make sure you have a 24C within your state. There are many other states that also have 24Cs for this, but all the others are federal labels. So before you pursue this route, make sure that the timing and the product for ryegrass control within wheat are either on the federal label or you have a 24C within your state. Again, there are many states that have 24Cs to help you out with this. So there are multiple timings here, and most of these timings are aimed at, so all of these have early post or delayed pre, and the idea behind those applications timings is safety for the crop. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about these application timing. So delayed pre, so actually let's back up a little bit there. So 14 days pre-plant, that just you spray, you wait 14 days, and then you can plant. Pre is pretty easy. You plant the crop, you spray the herbicide before it emerges, and you're good to go. Delayed pre is a little bit different. And what this is it's when 80% of the seeds have germinated and have a half-inch shoot up until spiking. Okay. So here's a picture we took of one of our fields. And so you can see the shoots on those wheat seeds there, and technically we're not there yet, right? So you might have 2 shoots there that are almost half an inch, but 2 out of 5 is not 80%. So we had to wait another couple of days to get to that timing for delayed pre. Now, early post is basically spiking through 4-tiller wheat. The reason why almost every label federally has these timings is because they are the safest timings for wheat. So pyroxasulfone controls weeds or has an effect on crops as a seedling shoot inhibitor. So if that shoot has developed, that herbicide is no longer going to be effective on the weed, or your ability to injure that crop is much lower. So it's all about crop safety, why these are on those labels. But as I just alluded to, if your crop is at that stage, guess what else is also at that stage? Your grass. Your annual ryegrass is probably also germinated or emerged, and that pyroxasulfone product is no longer effective, at least on those weeds that have germinated and emerged. Now, if there's some out there that still haven't germinated or emerged, which is the case with ryegrass, that product is still effective against those. But we have to put something in the tank to help control the ones that are emerged. So the whole reason why we think about all of these timings is basically there is a risk of injury to your wheat with pyroxasulfone. Okay. But there's some things we can do to mitigate that injury risk. Avoid coarse soils or low organic matter soils. If we avoid those, we reduce our injury risk. We plant at least 1 inch deep. Make sure we have a good quality seed bed. Make sure our planting equipment is closing those furrows. If those furrows aren't getting closed, you're going to get concentrated herbicide at the bottom of that furrow where that seed sits. And that is a case where you're going to get injury almost every single time. The other thing that we need to avoid is having saturated soils, or having soils that are really dry, planting into dry soils, and then having those soils get saturated after we plant and have our herbicide down. That is a very classic case where we can get some injury on our wheat from these herbicides. So a couple years ago, we had this exact case. We had a very, very dry September. I don't think we had any recordable rain in September and even in early October. And then we planted in some wheat. A lot of guys called it dusting in the wheat, and then finally got some rain late October into November, and it stayed really wet, got really cold. That is a perfect scenario for almost all herbicides for injury on our wheat, but especially these residuals we're talking about. And lo and behold, we did see some injury. So you can see there, the untreated, how much injury we got on that. You have Finesse 14 days pre-plant, Fierce 14 days pre-plant, Anthem Flex pre, and Anthem Flex delayed pre. So the light blue bars are ratings 14 days after planting. The dark blue is 28 days after planting. And you can see with our Fierce, Anthem Flex, both pre and delayed pre, 14 days afterwards, we did have more crop injury as compared to our untreated. Now, by 28 days after, your Anthem Flex treatment still had injury, but it was not significantly different than what we were seeing on our untreated. And so the Fierce, you still had significant injury, but by 7 days later, that injury, you could not distinguish it from the untreated. And this injury, just to be clear, was stunting. Okay. So it was stunting, and the reason we were able to see it is because we had an untreated out there. And when you have an untreated, you can see that stunting of the wheat. Now, if this is an entire field that's been applied to and there's nothing else around to compare, 9 times out of 10, we never even recognize that stunting occurred. But even if we do, by 4 to 5 weeks after the injury occurs, the wheat grows out of it, and we don't have an issue with it. And we have not seen any wheat yield penalties due to this type of injury. So the reason I'm saying that is because there is risk, and this is only 1 year out of about 6 years that we've been looking at this. There is risk, but every single time what we see is really good control. Okay. So this is over 3 years of data combined together. So yeah, Fierce 14 days pre-plant, Anthem Flex both pre and delayed pre, Residual delayed pre, Anthem Flex and Residual both e-post or early post. Again, that's from spiking to 4-tiller wheat. And then some splits of Anthem Flex where we're not putting it all on at one time, but splitting up the Anthem Flex and doing the same thing with the Residual. Okay. And one key thing to distinguish here is on those early post applications, we included 2 ounces of a 75% dry flowable metribuzin. Okay. We include that because remember, if you're out there early post, there's probably already some ryegrass up as well, and you need something to control that ryegrass. And 2 ounces of metribuzin will do a really good job of controlling that small ryegrass. Now, the reason you're doing e-post is because you're trying to avoid crop injury from the pyroxasulfone product, right? But there's risk with metribuzin as well. So there's risk in all of these different timings. But the thing to look at here is this is 3 months after planting, and all of these are giving you 85 to 95% control. So that is really good control. So I don't really care which timing you go with or which product you go with. All of these will do a good job of giving you suppression of ryegrass. And when you look at it in terms of the amount of ryegrass plants per square foot, we went from, in our untreated, 20 plants per square foot to less than 5 with every single one of these. So while there is risk of injury, the benefit far outweighs that risk. And many of our farmers in Kentucky have seen this. So another way we looked at this is, this is a different study that we did, and we looked at Fierce EZ again, Anthem Flex, and again, some early post applications of both Fierce and Residual. And the reason I wanted to show you this here is, just like all residuals and all of our crops, there is one fallacy, or there's a couple of fallacies, but one of the fallacies is you have to have an activating rainfall. So when you look at this and you look at the ryegrass control there on December 3rd, specifically looking at Fierce EZ and Anthem Flex there, the top two, the Fierce EZ has 60% control, whereas our Anthem Flex has 92% control, and only about a week and a half difference in when those were applied, right? Why is that? Why do we have so much difference in control? 2 different products, but they're both using pyroxasulfone, and really a pretty similar rate of pyroxasulfone between those 2 products. The difference here was an activating rainfall. The Fierce did not get an activating rainfall. We didn't get a rainfall event until after October 22nd. So that Fierce had already been out for 2 weeks before it got that rainfall event. And so you have to have a good activating rainfall to make these products work for you. And that is the one fallacy. If you don't get that rainfall that you need, these products don't hold up as well as we'd hope they would, but still 60% control is really good. Now, all of these we followed up with an application of Axial Bold, which is what you'll see here. And at the end of the season, there on April 27th, you're getting 73% to 100% control out of all of these different programs. We're using a residual herbicide, following it with Axial Bold. And in this case, our population is still sensitive to Axial Bold. Okay. So if it wasn't, again, this really shows you the power of that Axial Bold product. If we didn't, our control would be much lower. So having that tool is a big deal. But while a lot of our farmers still have that tool, we're really encouraging them to use a residual herbicide to help back up that tool, right? But even with these really good herbicide programs, the one concern I have is if you look in that panicle density per meter squared column at harvest, so this is the number of ryegrass panicles that were out there at harvest. And while in the untreated, it's a pretty heavy population at 259 seed heads per meter squared. All of these programs did a great job, got it down to 0 to 9 panicles per meter squared. But still, that's not 100% control. You still have some ryegrass seed getting by you, and that's a little bit concerning to me, especially when you consider this crop rotation we're in. Just letting a few weeds get by you every single year is going to build that population, and once we start getting these resistance events, such as axial resistance, you can build that population really quite quickly. So to kind of summarize all of that, we're really Axial Bold, that panoxidin plus phenoxaprop, is really the greatest tool we have for ryegrass control with those early post applications, while we still have efficacy with that without resistance. So we do know that we have resistance occurring and it's spreading, and we do have fears that it's going to become pretty widespread here within the next 5 to 10 years. So before we get to that stage, we really do want to start using some other products, such as the pyroxasulfone-based products that help suppress ryegrass emergence and give you another tool or another side of action for ryegrass control. There is risk of injury with that pyroxasulfone, but it can be mitigated, and we think the risk is much lower than the benefit. And also the other fallacy is you have to have that activating rainfall. And even with the perfect year, you don't have any injury, you have the activating rainfall, your pinoxidin is still working, we still have some ryegrass escapes out there. So that kind of takes us to the next thing that we've been looking at. Okay, we've been saying even in the best case scenario, if you have a few escapes, what can we do about it, right? What can we do to have 0% seed go back to the seed bank, right? So one thing that we're looking at is possibly using harvest weed seed control. So this is really popular, or really came to fruition in Australia, where they had rigid ryegrass in their wheat production. So they couldn't control rigid ryegrass with any of the herbicides any longer. They had no herbicides left. So this is what they went to. And this is why I'm looking at it within our wheat acres in Kentucky, because we're thinking, is this the next step we're going to have to take when we wear out all these herbicide tools that we have? And so harvest weed seed control is controlling that weed seed at harvest when you're harvesting the crop. So the key here is you have to have a weed that matures at the same time as the wheat, but also that holds on to the seed up until wheat harvest. If it sheds the seed early, your harvest weed control doesn't work, because if the seed's not there in the seed head, it's not going to get into the combine, and the method doesn't work. So that's the first thing we looked at. And so one of my grad students looked at this, and we literally went into wheat fields right before wheat harvest, and we took all the ryegrass seed heads out of an area, shelled out, and figured out how much ryegrass was in the seed head. And then we took a shop vacuum. I know this is crazy, but we took a shop vacuum and we vacuumed the ground in that same area. Okay. So, and what this did is we cleaned up all of that stuff out of the shop vacuum, compared it to how much seed was in the seed head. And that gave us an idea of how much seed had rained onto the soil surface prior to us getting there at harvest. So how much was on the soil surface versus how much is on the seed head. And as you can see here, we had more in the seed head than on the soil surface. So this was great. This meant that the ryegrass was holding on to its seed up to wheat harvest, which meant we had a chance to get that into the combine where we could put it through a seed control unit to control that seed. Okay. But the next key is, again, getting it into the combine. So this is something else that I had my student look at, and we did this in 2020 and 2021. We looked at how much ryegrass seed was going out of the back end of the combine in the chaff. If it was in the chaff, that means we could control it with a seed control unit, figuring out how much is going into the grain tank and how much is shattering at the combine header. Just like our crops, with our weeds, when that combine header hits that stem, we do have a risk of that seed not getting into the platform, but rather shattering out onto the ground. So we looked at all three of these. You can see in 2020, we had a much higher population than we did in 2021. And in 2020, there really wasn't a difference in the amount that we were finding between the three. In 2021, we were getting more in the chaff and the grain tank than what was shattering at the head. So that was good news. But the better way to look at this is combining the grain tank and the chaff together, because if you combine those together, we know we're getting it into the combine. Whereas if it's shattering at the head, we know that's not getting into the combine, and we know it's not going to be controlled with a seed control unit. And in both years, we're getting more into the combine than what was shattering at the head. So we said, this is good news. This means that we might be able to use a seed control unit to help us control ryegrass at wheat harvest. So we took the next step, and what we did is we bought one of these units. So we bought a Ryegrass seed control unit, and the way these things work is essentially all of the fine chaff. So not the straw chaff. So there's two portions of chaff that come out the back end of a combine, right? You have the straw, which is coming off the thresher or the thresher sieves or the straw walkers, however you want to talk about them. And that's the large chaff within wheat. We consider that the straw, right? That does not go through these units. These units could not handle that much biomass. So that goes on out. But what goes through this unit is the fine chaff. So that's everything coming off the cleaning sieves or off the fans, if you will. And that's all the small stuff. And that's really where most of the weed seed should be. It shouldn't be in the threshing portion. It should be in the cleaning portion. And all of that goes through these high impact mills that crush everything that's in there, creates a pretty fine powder. And if you have weed seeds in there, you should be killing those weed seeds. That's the whole idea behind this. So here's a picture of the actual unit we have on a farmer's combine. So it's key that we put it on a farmer's combine because these mills do take a lot of horsepower, has to be on a class 8 or bigger combine. So we have it on a farmer's combine, and we are using this in the field and trying to track, do these units work or not? Okay. So we caught out of the back end of the combine. So this is doing a direct catch out of that combine. And you can see this is with the seed control unit off versus on. And this is the amount of ryegrass seed that was in the chaff. And you can see when we had it on, we had significantly less intact ryegrass seed. So this is the key. If you looked in the chaff coming out of that unit, there was a lot of seed in there, but it was bits and pieces of seed. It wasn't viable seed any longer. So this is just counting whole viable seeds. And you can see we reduced that significantly when the unit was on. So these units work if we can get it in there. Okay. This is another way we looked at it. We looked at it just putting trays on the ground and looking at how much was coming out of the back end of the combine. And again, we found when we had the unit on, we reduced the amount of viable seed that was going back onto the ground coming out of the back end of the combine. So again, the units do work. The one problem though is you have to get that seed into the combine to get it to that seed control unit. So within this study, we were also tracking how much was shattering at the combine header. And when you include that amount of product, or when you include that seed that's shattering at the head and add it into how much is coming out the back end of the combine when the seed control unit is off and on, what we found is we're getting significant head shatter, and it's negating really the utility of that seed control unit. So that's something that we're going to have to overcome, is figure out, and this is just with 2 years with one combine header. So we got to figure out, are there adjustments we can make on that header? Are there adjustments we can make with our timing of harvest? Is there different headers we can use, or different types of headers we can use to try to get more of that ryegrass seed into the combine and not shattering at the header? So there's still some more work to do on this, but at least with this current setup, we're just losing way too much at the combine header, and it's really negating the utility of that seed control unit. Another place we looked at possibly where we might be losing some seed is through the straw portion. Again, the straw coming out of the back end of the combine does not go through this unit. These units would not be able to handle that much biomass. And again, in theory, most of our seed should be in the fine chaff that's growing through those mills and not in the straw. But we wanted to double check to make sure we weren't losing some of that seed through the straw portion. And that's what this is catching directly out of the unit and seeing how much intact seed we have there versus coming out of the straw chopper. And what we found is we're not losing a lot through that straw chopper. There is some seed coming through it, but it's not a significant amount. Much more of it is going into the seed control unit. And that is good news there. So our initial conclusions is, these seed control units, they can be effective if we can get the seed into the units. We're not necessarily losing it through the straw, but we are losing some seed at the combine header during harvest. And that's the biggest concern I have for harvest weed seed control. And so we have to overcome that. And despite our efforts to really start promoting harvest weed seed control or these seed control units, farmers do continue to ask, what herbicides can I use? What's the best herbicide? And really the reason is that we have herbicides like Axial that are just really, really good time in and time out. And they're a whole lot cheaper than these seed control units. So unfortunately, I don't know how much buy-in we're going to get on the harvest weed seed control until it's just an absolute necessity. Until we wear out all of our herbicides, but also we still have a lot of work to do to figure out the header shatter stuff and where we can really make these harvest weed seed control units really work for us within our system. So to kind of wrap all of this up and think about all of this, for ryegrass management within wheat, Within our system, especially a system like what we run in Kentucky, where we're finding glyphosate resistance and panoxidine resistance, it is a major threat. When you have both of those resistance events, it's a major threat to our no-tillage corn, wheat, double crop soybean system. And so we really have to start thinking about some alternatives here. One thing we've started doing, and we've gotten a lot of buy-in on, is using pyroxasulfone as a residual herbicide to help suppress that ryegrass emergence. Although with that pyroxasulfone, you do have risk of injury. And even with a good pyroxasulfone product program and an effective panoxidine application, we're still seeing escapes out there. And so that's where we're thinking maybe harvest weed seed control could be an option to be an additional control tactic if we're really thinking about completely eliminating the amount of ryegrass seed that goes back on the ground year in and year out. The other thing that we could start thinking about, I didn't really talk about it today because it wasn't part of today's talk, but what if we incorporated some full season soybeans within that system as well? Give ourselves another chance to get after this ryegrass, not in corn or wheat. Because remember, double crop soybeans, they're not really capturing any of that ryegrass, or we're not really capturing a time when we can control some of that ryegrass. So that's an additional tactic that we're thinking about as well, and that we're going to start doing more research in, recognizing that annual ryegrass, it's not going away. It is a problem in our wheat, and I think it's going to continue to be a problem. And these are some of the things that we're doing and we're thinking about to continue to move forward with having wheat as a vital part of our system while dealing with this weed. So I appreciate you guys' time today. I appreciate the Crop Protection Network letting me do this talk for them this year, and everything they do for us within the crop protection world and within pest management. And I appreciate all of your time today. Thank you.